My name is Maya Carter. I'm 32 years old, a registered nurse in Seattle, and the mother of a fierce little girl named Zia. Most days, my life looks ordinary from the outside early morning shifts, at the hospital packing school lunches, in the dark before dawn, folding laundry at midnight while the world sleeps. But what people don't see is the quiet battle I have fought for years. The battle to protect my daughter from the kind of love that wounds more than it heals. The battle to teach her she belongs even in rooms that refuse to see her. This is the story of the day she stopped waiting to be chosen and chose herself instead. She stood in her sparkly gold dress, clutching a small box no one noticed except me. At 7, my daughter had learned what it felt like to be invisible in a room full of gifts. But this Christmas, she didn't stay quiet. When her grandma handed everyone lavish presents and tossed her a candle like a pity prize, she walked up, placed that box on the table and said, "Dad told me to give this to you if you ever ignored me again." Inside was the truth adoption papers, a photo, and a letter that shattered every fake smile in that family. Because sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest truths. My 7-year-old daughter stood in front of the crowded dining table, dressed in the sparkly gold dress she had picked out herself 3 days before. I still remember how she twirled in front of the bedroom mirror that morning, her curls bouncing around her shoulders, asking me if she looked like a princess today. "You look stronger than any princess I've ever seen," I told her, and she did. The room was buzzing with the kind of chaotic holiday cheer that only families with too much champagne and too many unspoken tensions can create. Glasses clinked, forks scraped plates smeared with leftover cranberry sauce. Someone in the kitchen was laughing too loudly at a joke no one really heard. The smell of cinnamon ham glaze and artificial pine needles filled the air. But she stood there quietly in the center of it all, her little fingers wrapped around a small red box tied with gold ribbon. No one noticed her, except me. I was watching every detail. The way her chest rose and fell quickly at first, then slower, as if she was gathering every ounce of courage her tiny frame could hold. The way her eyes darted across the room, searching for the only person she wanted to see her. And finally, how she stepped forward each footfall, silent on the glossy wood floor, until she reached the head of the table. Her grandmother, my husband's mother, sat there like a queen presiding over her court. Her hair was perfectly styled into its usual stiff curls. Her sweater a deep wine color embroidered with gold thread. She was swirling her glass of Chardonnay in lazy circles' eyes, half focused on her other grandchildren, showing off their new iPads and bracelets. She didn't notice my daughter approaching. Then my daughter spoke, her voice clear and small, slicing through the noise like a thin shard of glass. "Grandma," she said, holding out the box with both hands, her chin trembling just slightly. "Dad told me to give this to you if you ever ignored me again." It was as if the entire room exhaled at once. The clinking stopped. Forks froze midair. Conversations trailed off into awkward, unfinished words. Even the background music, some cheerful Christmas carol about joy and peace, faded into a ghostly hum in my ears. For a single suspended moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat, hammering against my ribs, and the shallow sound of my daughter's breathing. Her grandmother looked at her with a tight, confused smile, as if she didn't understand the language being spoken, as if this was all part of some childish game. She reached out, took the box with careful manicured fingers, and laughed softly, shaking her head. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with that syrupy sweetness she reserved for moments she needed to keep the upper hand. "What is this?" Another art project? But I knew it wasn't, and so did my daughter. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, her shoulders pulled back, eyes unblinking, watching her grandmother's every move. Slowly Lorraine, because I stopped thinking of her as Mom. Years ago peeled back the gold ribbon and unwrapped the red paper. Her painted nails trembled just slightly as she opened the lid. At first, she looked inside with the bored detachment of someone expecting glitter glue or a handmade ornament she'd toss into the back of a drawer. But when she saw what was inside, she didn't laugh. She screamed. It was a sound I didn't know could come from her, a sharp guttural animal, like noise that tore through the air louder than the Christmas carols, louder than the gasps that erupted around the table, louder than the stunned silence that followed. People jumped. Someone dropped their glass, the stem shattering against the tiled floor. Her daughter-in-law rushed to her side. Her sister clapped a hand over her mouth. The other grandchildren stared wide-eyed, clutching their brand-new electronics to their chests, like shields against the chaos unraveling before them. People rushed over to see what was inside the box. Questions spilled out in panicked whispers. "What is it? What happened? Oh my God, Lorraine, are you okay?" But I didn't move. I already knew what was in that box. I knew it because months ago my husband had packed it himself, wrapping each item with a carefulness I didn't understand at the time. He told me it was for the day his mother went too far, the day he decided her cruelty would no longer go unanswered, the day he would show his daughter that silence was not the same as kindness. That day was today. And as I watched my daughter lower her trembling hands, letting out a slow breath she had been holding since we stepped into this gilded, joyless house, I felt something inside me shatter and reassemble all at once. Because this wasn't just about a box. It wasn't about Christmas or gifts or polite family performances. This was about a little girl who had spent her entire life being invisible in a room full of glittering decorations and carefully wrapped presents. And this was the day she decided she wouldn't be invisible anymore. For a few frozen seconds, no one moved. It was like the entire room forgot how to breathe. Forks hovered mid-air, chunks of glazed ham slipping off silver tines onto porcelain plates. Someone coughed quietly, the sound awkward and raw in the silence. The Christmas music continued to play from the speaker tucked behind the tree. Something about silver bells, but it felt so far away, like it belonged to another world, a world where children weren't forced to choose between silence and dignity. Lorraine sat there gripping the edges of the open box, her knuckles paling against the thin red cardboard. Her eyes flicked up to her son, my husband, searching for something in his face. An explanation, a defense, an apology. But Travis didn't move. He stayed seated at the end of the table, his fingers laced together so tightly. His wedding band pressed an angry red mark into his skin. His jaw was clenched, his eyes locked on his mother, but he didn't flinch. Not once. Lorraine, her sister, asked softly, leaning forward to peer into the box. "What is it? What's wrong?" Lorraine didn't answer. She was staring at the photo on top. A framed photograph, white wooden edges, decorated with tiny gold stars. In it, Travis sat in a worn hospital chair, a paper visitor bracelet looped around his wrist. He was holding Zia, her chubby toddler arms wrapped around his neck, her cheeks smeared with chocolate cake. Her smile was wide and toothy. His was tired but filled with something quiet and infinite love relief belonging. Someone had captured that moment during her adoption celebration. At the bottom of the photo, written in swirling gold script, it said, "Day One Dad." The words glinted under the chandelier light, and for a moment, Lorraine just stared at them. Her lips twitched like she wanted to say something cruel, to dismiss it all as childish nonsense, but no words came out. Then, with trembling fingers, she set the photo aside and reached into the box again. She pulled out a sealed white envelope, the flap taped down, with a neat strip of gold washi tape. For a heartbeat, she just held it there, staring at my daughter like she might snatch it back. But Zia didn't move. She sat perfectly still in her seat, her gold dress shimmering under the light, her eyes calm and unblinking. Slowly, Lorraine peeled the tape off and opened the envelope. She unfolded the thick cream paper inside and began to read. At first, her face was blank. Her eyes moved across the page lashes, fluttering just slightly. Then her lips parted and her breath hitched like she'd been punched. The color drained from her cheeks in a slow, creeping tide. I knew what the letter said. I had never read it, but I knew. Because Travis wrote it months ago after Thanksgiving, after watching his daughter eat dinner from an old chipped plate, while the other grandchildren laughed over their matching gold-rimmed ones. He didn't tell me what he wrote, only that it was for the day his mother went too far. The day she needed to be reminded that love wasn't hers to gatekeep. Lorraine's eyes flicked across the table as she read, desperate to find someone who might save her from the words printed in her own son's handwriting. It said, "Mom, if you're reading this, it means you've hurt my daughter again. Not just my daughter by love, but my daughter by law, by promise, by choice. I've spent years hoping you would open your heart the way I did. Years watching you treat her like she didn't belong. I thought maybe with time you'd see her the way I do. But if she ever had to give you this box, it means she saw what I saw, that you don't consider her real. Zia is my child. She is your granddaughter. If you cannot love her as such, then you don't love me. And I will not let her grow up thinking she has to earn a place in this family. She already belongs. She always has. If you cannot accept that you will no longer be welcome in our home or in our lives, Travis." When she finished, her hand dropped to the table, the paper crumpling under her grip. Her eyes were wide and wet, but no tears fell. She blinked hard, swallowing repeatedly as if trying to force down the sharp lump of reality lodged in her throat. Then it happened. She screamed. Not a polite gasp or a shocked exclamation, but a real scream, raw and guttural, ripped straight from her chest, like it tore something open on its way out. The kind of scream that makes your scalp prickle and your stomach drop. The kind of scream that doesn't come from anger, but from fear. From knowing deep down that the mask you've worn so perfectly for so long has finally cracked, and there's nothing underneath worth showing. Maddie flinched so hard her new iPad slipped from her lap onto the carpet. Jonah stopped chewing his cookie and just stared, crumbs falling from his open mouth. Lorraine's sister reached out as if to steady her, but Lorraine jerked away, shoving back her chair with such force it scraped across the hardwood with an ear-splitting screech. She pointed a trembling finger at Travis, then at me, her voice breaking on every syllable. "How could you do this to me?" she hissed, tears finally spilling over. "How could you humiliate me like this, in front of everyone, But Travis didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with something I'd never seen before. Pity, maybe. Or relief. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "We didn't humiliate you," he said. "You did that all by yourself. I used to think marrying Travis meant marrying into something beautiful. When I first met his family, I remember feeling overwhelmed in the best possible way. They were so loud, so close, knit so effortlessly warm to each other. Cookouts every summer weekend, game nights where they all crowded around the dining table screaming at each other over Uno cards and nacho platters. Holiday parties that felt straight out of a Hallmark movie, twinkling lights on every window, cinnamon candles burning in every room, a table so perfectly set it looked like no one should dare touch it. And at the center of it all was Lorraine. She had this presence. She could walk into a room and everything shifted to orbit around her. She knew everyone's schedules, everyone's preferences, everyone's secrets. She always wore lipstick even when she was just cleaning the house. Her voice carried easily even when she wasn't trying. It was the voice of a woman used to being listened to. I admired her. I thought, that's what a strong woman looks like. I told myself if I just watched her closely enough, I could learn how to run a family with that kind of certainty, that easy authority. I respected her, and I wanted her to like me. God, I wanted that so badly. At first she did, or at least she acted like she did. She complimented my cooking even though I knew my roasted chicken was dry. She laughed at my jokes even when they fell flat. She hugged me goodbye, wrapping me in the scent of her expensive floral perfume, whispering, "I'm so glad Travis found you." It felt real. For a while. But then little cracks started to show. I remember the first time I noticed it. We were sitting in her kitchen on a Saturday morning. Travis and his brother were outside fixing a broken fence post. She poured me coffee in a dainty china cup with blue flowers painted around the rim. I complimented her set, telling her how pretty it was. She smiled without looking at me and said, "My grandmother brought those over from Germany. We keep them for family." I laughed awkwardly, unsure what to say. We keep them for family. The words stung, though she moved on so quickly I wondered if I imagined it. Later that day, I saw she had a family group text, planning an upcoming barbecue. When Travis handed me his phone to show a funny meme, I saw my name wasn't on the list. My chest tightened, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to seem insecure or needy. I told myself it didn't matter. But it kept happening. She started commenting on how different I was, how I grew up differently than Travis's ex-girlfriend, who apparently made homemade pasta from scratch, how I didn't understand their family's way of doing things. She'd say it with that same syrupy voice dripping with sweet poison, always subtle, always just enough to make me question whether it was in my head. And so, I tried harder. I brought her flowers every visit. I cooked meals from her mother's old recipes, staying up late to practice folding dumplings the way she once told me she loved. I complimented her house, her clothes, her hair. I showed up early to help set the table and stayed late to wash every dish by hand. I thought, if I just give her everything she wants, eventually she'll see I belong here. But then Zia came along. My daughter. My miracle. She was only 2 when Travis walked into our lives. I remember their first meeting so clearly. She was hiding behind my leg, peeking at him with her big dark eyes. He knelt down, smiled, and asked if he could see her teddy bear. She held it out to him without a word, and that was it. He never once hesitated. He stepped in with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who he wanted to be for her. He braided her hair, read her bedtime stories in funny voices, took her to dance recitals, and waited patiently with his phone camera ready, even when her whole routine was just hopping in a circle and forgetting half the steps. When we got married, he adopted her legally. We never used the word step in our house. She was his daughter in every way that mattered, and he was her dad, period. But Lorraine never saw it that way. At first, she pretended. She sent Zia birthday cards with glitter stickers and brought her small gifts on Christmas plastic toys from the clearance aisle or paperback books she clearly never read. But even as she smiled, the difference was there. Zia didn't get invited to cousin sleepovers. She wasn't included in the matching Christmas pajamas Lorraine bought every grandchild. She would sit quietly on the floor, watching Maddie and Jonah pose for their Instagram perfect photos in their red and green flannel sets, while she sat in her regular cotton nightgown. My daughter. My bright, stubborn, beautiful girl, with eyes so dark they looked almost black under the sun. She had a laugh that bubbled up from her chest and burst out like a song. She was born 2 years before I met Travis, in a time when I thought I'd never love anyone again. For a while, it was just me and her surviving off grocery store, rotisserie chickens, and bedtime stories I made up on the spot about brave little girls who carried secrets in their pockets and saved entire kingdoms with nothing but their kindness. When Travis entered our lives, it was like the world cracked open just enough to let in a little more light. He never treated Zia like an accessory to me. Like loving her was simply part of loving me. From the beginning, it was her he showed up for just as fiercely as he showed up for me. He was there for her first scraped knee under his watch. I remember him carrying her into the kitchen, her tears dripping onto his shirt, as he whispered, "You're okay, sweetheart. I've got you. I've always got you." He taught her how to ride a bike, holding the seat steady long after she thought he'd let go, until she looked back and saw him jogging behind her cheering. When we got married, he signed the adoption papers with shaking hands and tears rolling down his cheeks. That night, Zia crawled onto his lap in her little flannel pajamas and whispered, "Hi, Dad," like it was the first time she felt allowed to say it out loud. From that day forward, there was no step. There was no half. There was no almost. She was his daughter, fully, unequivocally. The world could say whatever it wanted. In our house, she belonged. But Lorraine never accepted that. At first, she pretended. She'd send Zia a birthday card with glitter stickers spelling out happy birthday in looping cursive. She'd bring her a small stuffed animal on Christmas, one of those cheap ones, with beads leaking out of a tiny hole in the seam. She'd smile and pat her head, saying things like, "Aren't you just precious," in a voice people use for stray dogs at the shelter, kind but detached. Meanwhile, Maddie got full princess dress-up trunks. Jonah got brand new baseball gear, the real leather kind that still smelled of the factory, when he unwrapped it. Zia noticed. Kids always do. She saw the way Lorraine's eyes softened when Maddie twirled in her Elsa gown, how she ruffled Jonah's hair and called him my little champion. She saw how Lorraine never touched her curls, never called her anything with ownership in it. Never my girl, never my granddaughter. When family photos were taken, Lorraine posed with Maddie in her arms, Jonah on her lap, and Zia standing to the side holding her own hands in front of her, like she didn't know what to do with them. I'd watch her in those moments, wondering how much of that silent rejection she understood. One Christmas, Lorraine bought matching flannel pajamas for all the grandkids, red and green plaid with their names monogrammed on the pocket. Zia opened her package to find a generic pink pajama set with no embroidery, no connection to the others. She put it on anyway, sitting among the cousins, hugging her knees to her chest, as Maddie and Jonah posed for photos, arms around each other, Lorraine beaming proudly behind them. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she asked Mommy how come mine doesn't match. Her voice was small, tentative, like she already knew the answer, but needed to hear me say something that would make it hurt less. I swallowed hard. Maybe Grandma ran out of the other kind, I said, hating myself for how unconvincing it sounded even to my own ears. She was quiet for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Then she whispered, "It's okay. I still like pink, but it wasn't okay, and I knew it." At Thanksgiving, Lorraine gave each grandchild a personalized plate with their name painted in gold, cursive along the rim. Jonah's had a little football next to his name. Maddie's had a tiara. Zia's place setting held a chipped white plate pulled from the back of the cabinet. No gold, no name, no design. That night, as I was brushing her teeth, she caught my eye in the mirror and asked, "Maybe she thinks I'm just visiting." It took everything in me not to fall to my knees, right there on the bathroom rug, and sob. But I couldn't show her that. I forced myself to smile, kissed her forehead, and said, "You're never just visiting, baby. You belong everywhere you stand." But deep down, I was lying to her. I was lying to both of us, because no matter how many times I said it, I couldn't make Lorraine believe it. And neither could Travis. He saw it too. He tried to hide it for everyone's sake, but I noticed the way his fists curled under the table every time Lorraine passed Zia over for a hug. The way his jaw tightened when she'd say, "Take a photo of me with my grandkids," while Zia sat off to the side playing with her shoelaces. I saw how his eyes burned with something dark and helpless, something that told me he was finally realizing what I had known all along. You can't force someone to love a child. They've decided doesn't count. But still we kept showing up, because that's what families do, right? Even when it's killing you inside. It only got worse as Zia grew older. Because when kids are little, you can distract them. You can wave a shiny toy or promise ice cream on the way home, and for a while they forget the sting of being left out. But as they grow, their eyes sharpen. They see things. They see everything. Zia started noticing exactly how many times Grandma hugged Maddie and Jonah before even looking at her. She noticed how Lorraine asked Jonah about his baseball tournaments and Maddie about her dance recitals, but never once asked Zia how her art projects were going, even though every time we visited she brought a new one in her tiny backpack, hoping someone would ask to see it. She noticed when Lorraine posted photos on Facebook of all my beautiful grandkids, but cropped Zia out of the frame. She noticed when Lorraine handed out candy canes at Christmas to every child except her. At first, she would just look at me, confusion clouding her big dark eyes, and I would smile too brightly and say, "Oh, maybe she ran out, sweetie. Here, you can have mine." But after a while, she stopped looking at me. She just folded inward like she was trying to make herself smaller, take up less space in a world that had already decided she didn't fit. And God, it broke me. Because what do you say to your child when they ask, "Why doesn't Grandma like me?" What do you say when you're trying to raise them to be strong and proud of who they are? But every time they walk into that house, they're handed another silent reminder that love is conditional. What do you say when their innocence collides head-on with someone else's cruelty? One Thanksgiving when Zia was 6, Lorraine handed out her annual tradition of personalized plates. Jonah's had footballs painted along the edges. Maddie's had tiny silver tiaras. Zia's spot at the table held an old chipped plate with a fading floral pattern. It didn't have her name. It didn't even match the set. It looked like something pulled from a dusty box in the garage. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she lay on her side staring at the wall. I smoothed her curls back from her forehead, whispering, "What are you thinking about?" Baby, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said so softly I almost didn't hear, "Maybe she thinks I'm just visiting." I felt something inside me fracture so deep, I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. My throat burned with the words I wanted to say. She's wrong. You belong everywhere. She's the one who doesn't deserve you. But all I managed was a trembling. You're not visiting. You're part of this family. But even as I said it, I knew she didn't believe me. Because no matter how many times I told her she belonged, Lorraine's actions told her otherwise. And actions always speak louder than words. After I left her room, I went downstairs and found Travis sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing. His shoulders were slumped, his hands clasped in front of him so tightly, his knuckles turned white. "Did you hear what she said?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't look at me, just nodded once. "Travis," I whispered, tears spilling down my cheeks. "We can't keep letting this happen. She's just a little girl. He pressed his palms against his eyes, rubbing them hard. When he dropped his hands, his eyes were red. "I know," he said quietly. "I know." But that was it. No plan, no confrontation, just quiet resignation. Because he didn't want to hurt his mom, because he didn't want to cause drama, because he didn't know what to do. So I stayed silent too, because I didn't want to be seen as the problem, I didn't want to force him to choose between his mother and me. I told myself I was being strong, being mature, keeping the peace for Zia's sake. I told myself love didn't need to be proven with matching plates or Christmas pajamas. I told myself as long as she had me and Travis, it would be enough. But deep down, I was lying to myself. Because every time I swallowed my hurt, every time I smiled through the pain, every time I pretended it didn't matter, I was teaching Zia that being treated as less was something we just had to accept. That her worth was negotiable. That silence was safer than truth. And God, what a horrible lesson that was to teach my daughter. But back then, I didn't know how to be louder than my fear. I didn't know how to fight for her without tearing everything else apart. I didn't know how to say no more. So I stayed quiet, and she grew quieter too. Our arguments were never loud. They didn't erupt like storms with slammed doors and shouted words we couldn't take back. No, our fights were quiet. They happened late at night when the house was still, when Zia was asleep in her room, with her nightlight casting soft golden shapes across her ceiling. That was when the weight of the day finally broke through our forced smiles. I would sit on the edge of the bed, peeling off my earrings with trembling fingers, my chest tight, with all the words I hadn't said at Lorraine's dinner table. Travis would stand at the sink brushing his teeth, staring into the mirror like he couldn't recognize the man looking back at him. Travis? I'd whisper, my voice cracking from holding back tears all evening. You saw what she did today. He would rinse his mouth and sigh, rubbing a towel over his face, before finally turning to me. I know he'd say softly, then say something I'd plead my words, tumbling out too fast, too desperate. Please. She called Zia, that girl, again. She didn't even try to hide it this time. He would sit down on his side of the bed, staring at the floor. His hands would come together, fingers weaving tightly, knuckles turning white. I noticed he'd say again, his voice hollow. Then why don't you say anything to her? I would ask, tears finally slipping free. Why do we keep letting her treat our daughter like she's not part of this family? He'd shake his head slowly, eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't know how to handle it, he whispered. She's my mom. And that was always the answer. She's my mom. Like that was supposed to explain everything. Like that was supposed to make the ache in my chest fade away. Like that was supposed to make it okay that every family gathering felt like walking Zia into a battlefield where she didn't even know she was the enemy. What about Zia? I asked one night, my voice raw from crying into my pillow. When is it going to matter more that she's your daughter than that Lorraine is your mother? He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the shadows dancing across the carpet from the streetlight outside. Then he nodded once like he was making a silent promise to himself. I'll talk to her, he said. Eventually. But eventually never came. Because every time the next family gathering rolled around, we fell back into the same quiet routine. I'd dress Zia in her prettiest dress braid, her curls with trembling fingers, my chest tight with dread. Travis would drive us there in silence, one hand gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles blanched. We'd walk into Lorraine's perfectly decorated house, filled with twinkling lights and cinnamon candles and plaster on smiles that felt like they might crack our faces in half. We'd sit at her table eating her food, watching her lavish praise and gifts on Maddie and Jonah, while Zia sat politely with her hands folded in her lap, her little gold dress shimmering under the chandelier light. And we would say nothing. We kept telling ourselves it was for the bigger picture, for family unity, for the cousins, for the memories, for tradition. I told myself love didn't need to be proven with matching pajamas or personalized plates. I told myself Zia would grow up stronger if she learned to find her worth within herself. Not from other people's approval, But deep down, I knew the truth. I was staying quiet because I didn't want to be seen as the problem. Because I didn't want to force Travis to choose between his mother and me. Because I didn't want to risk losing the fragile illusion of peace we'd built. And every time I swallowed my hurt, every time I smiled through Lorraine's cruel dismissals, every time I told Zia, "It's okay, baby," when it absolutely wasn't okay, I was teaching her that love is something you have to earn by staying silent. That being treated as less was something we just had to accept to keep the peace. One night after another silent dinner where Zia got ignored while Maddie and Jonah opened their expensive gifts, I couldn't hold it in anymore. As we got ready for bed, I turned to Travis, my chest heaving with silent sobs. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered, wiping tears from my cheeks. "I can't keep watching her shrink a little bit more every time we go there." He looked at me, eyes red, jaw tight with guilt. "I know," he said quietly. "I hate it too." "Then do something," I begged, my voice breaking. "Please, Travis. For her." He swallowed hard, looking down at his hands. I told her about the box, he finally said, his voice so low I almost didn't hear. "What box?" I asked, confused, wiping my tears away. He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping. "A few months ago, after Thanksgiving, I packed a box for Zia. I told her if Grandma ever made her feel like she didn't belong again, she could give it to her. I told her what was inside. I told her it was her choice." I stared at him, stunned. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because," he said, his voice trembling, "I didn't want to drag you into another fight about my family. But I needed her to know I see it. I needed her to know she wasn't imagining it. I needed her to feel like she had something to stand on." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The room was silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the dresser. Then I whispered, "What's in the box, Travis?" He looked up at me, tears finally falling from his eyes. "Everything she needs to know who she is." He said softly, "Everything Grandma refuses to see." Christmas came faster than I expected that year. Maybe it was because I was dreading it so deeply that every day felt like sand, slipping through my fingers, impossible to hold back. Or maybe it was because I kept telling myself, maybe this year will be different. I wrapped gifts late into the night, curling shiny ribbons around boxes of bath soaps and candles I bought on sale, telling myself it was the thought that counted, even if the thought was just, "Please don't notice how tired I am." I packed matching outfits for the kids. Zia picked out a sparkly gold dress weeks before the one she spun around in at Target until her curls floated around her like a halo. I bought it for her even though it wasn't on the list because in that moment seeing her shine was worth every skipped coffee that week. We arrived at Lorraine's house just before noon. As always, the place looked like a magazine spread. The massive artificial tree towered to the ceiling, each branch perfectly fluffed and dusted with fake snow gold and red ornaments arranged with mathematic precision. The fireplace blazed garlands twined across the mantel stockings, embroidered with each grandchild's name hanging in a neat row. Except there wasn't one for Zia. She noticed immediately. Her eyes flicked across the row of stockings, Maddie, Jonah, Connor, even the baby cousin who wasn't old enough to walk yet, but hers wasn't there. Her little shoulders slumped just slightly, but she didn't say anything. She just reached for my hand, squeezing it softly as we walked into the living room. Lorraine greeted Maddie with a loud squeal, arms outstretched, kissing her on both cheeks like she was royalty. She tousled Jonah's hair, telling him how tall he'd gotten, how handsome he looked in his navy sweater. Then she turned to Zia. "Hi, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with forced cheer. "You look festive." Her eyes skimmed Zia's dress, lingering just long enough to register disapproval before flicking away. She didn't bend down. She didn't hug her. She didn't ask about school or art or dance or anything at all. Instead, she reached out and took the small wrapped gift from Zia's hands, the one she had made for her in art class, a painted wooden trinket box with rhinestones glued on top, the word Grandma, spelled out in crooked glitter letters. Lorraine took it without looking, setting it down on a side table like it was a napkin someone handed her by mistake. Zia didn't say anything. She just stood there for a moment staring at the box sitting alone among the empty wine glasses before turning away and sitting next to Maddie on the couch. I watched her the entire afternoon, watched her shrink a little bit more every hour, watched her polite smile flicker as Lorraine handed Maddie a velvet pouch with a wink, whispering, "Don't open it until later," as if sharing a secret Zia would never be invited to hear. Watched her sit silently while Jonah ripped open an envelope stuffed with crisp cash bills, Lorraine clapping proudly and saying, "Buy yourself something nice, my little man." Finally, Lorraine turned to Zia. She rummaged through the pile of gifts at her feet and pulled out a small white bag. She held it up between two fingers like it was something she didn't want to touch any longer than necessary. "This is for you, sweetheart," she said. "Didn't want you to feel completely left out." Zia stood up, quietly walked over and took the bag with both hands. Inside was a lavender-scented candle in a plain glass jar. There was a tag tied around the wick that read, "To Travis's girl." That was it. No card, no sparkle, no note calling her granddaughter or Zia or sweet girl. Just Travis's girl, like she was an accessory. Like she didn't even deserve her own name. My heart fractured. I looked at Travis. He was staring down at the carpet, his fingers clenched so tightly in his lap, his wedding ring cut into his skin. His jaw was locked, eyes red with rage and regret. But he didn't speak. Zia sat back down next to me, resting the candle in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't pout. She just went quiet. The kind of quiet that sinks into a child's bones, that builds walls they carry for the rest of their life. The kind of quiet that teaches them, don't expect too much. It hurts less that way. Lorraine moved on like nothing happened. She handed out more gifts, laughing loudly when Maddie opened her new iPad and nearly dropped it from excitement. She clapped when Jonah showed off his new baseball glove, hugging him tight and whispering something into his ear that made him beam with pride. But I didn't hear any of it. All I could hear was the sound of my own heart cracking over and over again every time I glanced at my daughter sitting so still in her gold dress, clutching that candle like it was the only thing tethering her to this place. That night, after dinner and forced photos and champagne toasts, we pretended to enjoy. I pulled Travis aside in the kitchen. My voice trembled with barely contained fury. "You need to say something," I whispered. "She called your daughter Travis's girl like she's a guest here, like she doesn't belong." He didn't answer right away. He just stared down at the dish towel, in his hands breathing hard. Then, without looking at me, he said, "I told Zah to give her the box if this ever happened again." I blinked. What box?" He looked up at me, then eyes dark and resolute. "The box I packed months ago." I told her she could decide when it was time. I stared at him, realization crashing over me like a tidal wave. She remembers. He nodded once. She remembers. And in that moment, I felt something shift. Something electric and terrifying and powerful. Because this wasn't just another ignored moment we would brush off. This wasn't going to be one more lesson in quiet patience and polite silence. This was something else entirely. This was the day my daughter stopped waiting to be seen and decided to show them exactly who she was. That night, the house was silent on the drive home. Christmas lights blurred past the windows, glowing red and green in the winter dark. Zia sat in her car seat, still wearing her sparkly gold dress, the lavender candle resting on her lap like a sad little trophy. Her curls were frizzed at the ends from a day of sitting against scratchy couch cushions, and her eyes were fixed on the flickering street lamps ahead. I turned around in my seat and reached for her hand. "Hey, baby," I said softly. "You okay?" She didn't answer right away. She traced the label on the candle with her thumb, picking at the edge of the sticker. When she finally spoke, her voice was so small, I almost didn't hear it over the hum of the tires on the road. "Is Grandma mad at me?" she asked. Before I could respond, Travis spoke. His voice was quiet but steady, filling the car with something heavy and certain. "No, sweetheart," he said. "Grandma just forgot something important today." Zia turned her gaze towards him, blinking. What did she forget? He took a deep breath, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. "She forgot who you are." There was silence for a moment. Then Zia looked down at the candle again. She was quiet for a long stretch of highway, the kind of quiet where you know a child is thinking thoughts far too big for their little hearts to carry. Finally she spoke, but I think she's about to remember. I felt the air leave my lungs like a punch to the chest. "What do you mean, baby?" She reached down beside her and picked up something wrapped in red paper. It had been sitting at her feet the whole drive home. She held it up, her small fingers gripping it tightly. "I want to give her the box tomorrow," she said. For a moment the world felt suspended, like time itself paused to watch this 7-year-old girl decide her own destiny. I looked at Travis. His face was still turned towards the road, but his eyes glistened under the passing streetlights. "You're serious?" I asked him softly. He nodded once. "It's her choice. I told her that from the beginning." I turned back to Zia, her little face illuminated by the dashboard lights. Her eyes were calm. Not angry, not sad, just calm. Like someone who already knew exactly what needed to be done. That night when we got home, I helped her out of the car, while Travis gathered the leftover cookies and gift bags from the back seat. She clutched the candle in one hand and the small red box in the other, both wrapped like fragile memories, both heavier than any gift a child should ever have to carry. I knelt down beside her on the driveway, the cold seeping through my jeans, and brushed her curls back from her face. "Do you want a bath before bed, sweet girl?" I asked. "Or we can watch a movie in my room if you want." She shook her head slowly. "No, Mommy," she whispered. "I just want to get ready for tomorrow." I paused. "What's tomorrow?" She looked at me with those deep, unblinking eyes. "Brunch at Grandma's," she said. "I'm giving her the box." My breath caught in my chest, not from fear but from awe, because in that moment, staring into her steady little face, I saw something I had never seen before. Certainty. There was no trembling, no tears, no questioning whether it was the right thing to do. Just a quiet, unwavering decision made by a girl who had finally seen enough. Later, as I brushed her hair in her bedroom, Travis came in and sat on her bed. She looked up at him in the mirror and asked, "Can I still give it to her tomorrow?" He nodded, his voice rough with emotion. "It's your choice, Zah. I told you that from the beginning." She smiled, then not the bubbly, squealing grin she gave when we promised her ice cream or took her to the zoo, but something different, smaller, more focused. It was the smile of someone who understood the weight of what she carried, someone who knew what it meant to be heard. After she fell asleep that night, curled under her favorite fleece blanket covered in tiny gold stars, I found Travis sitting alone at the kitchen table. The house was dark except for the dim glow of the microwave clock. He was staring down at his hands, his thumbs rubbing circles into his palms, like he was trying to erase something only he could see. I sat down across from him, the wood chair creaking under me. "What exactly is in that box?" Travis?" I asked softly. He didn't look up. For a long moment, he just kept rubbing his palms. Then he swallowed hard and whispered, "A few months ago after Thanksgiving, I watched her play with Maddie during Jonah's birthday party. They were laughing in the backyard. Then Lorraine called the kids in for cake. Maddie and Jonah got big slices with extra frosting and sprinkles. Zia got the end piece. No decoration, no candle, nothing." I closed my eyes remembering that day. Remembering how I told myself it wasn't intentional, even though deep down I knew better. That night he continued his voice breaking. She came up to me and asked if she was someone's cousin too. I didn't know what to say, so I packed the box. I printed her adoption papers again. I wrote her a letter. I told her if Grandma ever made her feel like she didn't belong again, she could give it to her. I told her she didn't have to be quiet about it. Tears blurred my vision as I reached across the table and grabbed his hand. He looked up at me, finally eyes red and tired. "I didn't want to make it a fight," he whispered. "But I needed her to know I see it. I needed her to feel like she had something to stand on. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I realized he had drawn the line I had been begging him to draw. Not with shouting or ultimatums or threats, but by quietly giving his daughter the power to say, 'Enough.' The next morning, the air felt heavy with something I couldn't name. Zia woke before dawn. I heard her little feet pad softly down the hallway, the quiet creak of her bedroom door as she pushed it open, and then the rustle of her gold dress as she pulled it from the closet. She wanted to wear it again. The same sparkly gold dress she'd worn the day before, the one she'd picked out weeks ago, believing it would make her look like a princess. But today she wasn't dressing like a princess. She was dressing like a warrior. I helped her redo her curls, smoothing each one with gentle fingers, feeling their softness coil around my knuckles. She chose the glittery headband she had worn on the day Travis signed her adoption papers, the one with tiny golden stars across the top. She didn't say it was for luck. She didn't need to. I knew. At breakfast, she barely touched her cereal. Travis watched her silently, his eyes lingering on the red box sitting next to her, on the table. He reached out once, brushing his thumb across the top of it, as if blessing it with everything he couldn't find the words to say. When it was time to leave, she picked up the box with both hands, holding it against her chest, like it was something sacred. In the car, she didn't fidget. She didn't ask what would happen. She just stared out the window, her reflection framed by streaks of early morning light, looking so small and so impossibly strong at the same time. Lorraine's house looked exactly the same as it did every holiday. The giant wreath on the front door, the flickering reindeer on the lawn, the smell of cinnamon rolls and honey ham drifting into the driveway before we even knocked. Everything so perfectly arranged to look like love. We stepped inside. Maddie squealed when she saw Zia's dress. Jonah waved shyly before diving back into his new video game. Lorraine stood at the stove stirring gravy with her back to us. She didn't turn around. Morning Mom Travis said quietly. She hummed in acknowledgement but kept stirring. "Brunch is almost ready," she said. "You can all sit." We gathered at the long mahogany table polished so bright it reflected the crystal chandelier above. Zia sat between me and Travis, her small hands resting in her lap, the red box pressed between her knees under the tablecloth. Brunch was silent. Lorraine complimented Maddie's hair 3 times. She asked Jonah about school. She didn't say a single word to Zia. Not about her dress, not about her curls, not about the painted trinket box still sitting unopened on her side table from yesterday. When everyone finished eating and the plates were being cleared, Zia looked up at Travis. He nodded once almost imperceptibly. Her tiny shoulders straightened. She reached down, picked up the box, and slid out of her chair. No one noticed her at first. She walked around the table, each step deliberate and silent, until she reached Lorraine's side. Then she lifted her chin, her voice cutting through the murmured conversations like a blade. "Grandma," she said clearly, "Dad told me to give this to you if you ever ignored me again." The room went still. Forks clattered onto plates. Someone gasped softly. Lorraine froze her hand, gripping the gravy ladle eyes, wide with confused irritation. She turned, her painted lips curling into a tight smile. "What's this, sweetheart?" she said, her voice tinged with forced sweetness that barely hid her annoyance. But Zia didn't answer. She set the box down in front of her and stepped back. Her gold dress shimmered in the morning light spilling through the dining room window. Her curls framed her small, unblinking face. And for the first time in her life, I watched her take up space in that room. Travis reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it so tight it hurt. But I didn't pull away. I needed to feel the pain. I needed to remember every second of this moment. Lorraine looked around the table, eyes darting between her guests, searching for someone to join her in dismissing this as childish nonsense. But no one moved. Even Maddie was silent, her eyes wide, as she clutched her fork with trembling fingers. Finally, Lorraine let out a brittle laugh. "What is this, some kind of joke?" she said, picking up the box with 2 fingers like it might dirty her hands. She peeled away the red paper, the sound of ripping wrapping echoing in the silent room. She lifted the lid. The first thing she saw was the photo. It was framed in white wood, decorated with tiny gold stars Zia had glued on herself. In the picture, Travis sat in a worn hospital chair holding Zia against his chest. She was only 2, her cheeks smeared with birthday cake frosting her little arms, wrapped tightly around his neck. He was smiling with tears in his eyes, looking at her like he was seeing the whole universe for the first time. At the bottom of the frame, written in gold marker, it said, "Day 1, Dad." Lorraine's face paled. Her fingers trembled as she set the photo aside, revealing a sealed envelope underneath. She ripped it open with shaking hands and unfolded the letter inside. Her lips moved silently as she read. The color drained from her face, her shoulders slumping with each line. By the time she reached the end, her hands were shaking so violently, the letter rattled against the table. Then, like something snapped inside her, she screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain or fear. It was a scream of rage, a guttural, feral sound, and that made the chandelier tremble overhead. Maddie jumped. Jonah flinched so hard his chair tipped back, Travis reaching out to steady him without taking his eyes off his mother. "How dare you!" Lorraine hissed, her voice dripping with venom as she looked at Travis. "How dare you do this to me, in my own home?" In front of everyone. Travis stood slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. His voice was calm, deadly quiet. "We didn't do this to you," he said. "You did this to yourself." Lorraine's eyes widened with fury as she turned to me, pointing a trembling finger. "This is her doing," she spat. "She turned you against your own mother." I stood too, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "No," I said softly, looking her straight in the eye. "Zia gave you a gift today. She gave you the chance to see her. You chose not to." For a moment, the only sound was the fireplace crackling behind us. Then Travis turned to Zia and held out his hand. "Ready to go, sweetheart." Zia nodded. She stood tall, her gold dress shimmering with each step as she took his hand. I grabbed our coats. No one stopped us. No one said goodbye. We walked out together, leaving behind the house filled with fake, gold-forced smiles and a love that was never really love at all. And for the first time, I didn't feel like we were leaving empty-handed. We were leaving with the only thing that ever mattered, our truth. The silence in the car was different this time. It wasn't heavy with sadness or choked with all the words we couldn't say. It felt clean, like something poisonous had finally been cut out, leaving behind an ache that promised healing. Zia sat in her car seat staring out the window, her curls haloed by the late morning sun. She held the candle Lorraine gave her on her lap, turning it slowly in her hands. Her face was calm, so calm it made my chest tighten. There were no tears, no trembling lip, just quiet certainty. After a while, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think she read the whole letter?" Travis glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes dark but steady. Every single word, baby. Zia nodded once, then turned back to the window. And in that moment, I saw something shift in her, something unspoken and powerful. She wasn't waiting for approval anymore. She wasn't holding her breath for someone to choose her. She had chosen herself. I thought back to what Lorraine had seen in that box before her scream tore through the room. She saw the photo first Travis holding Zia the day he signed her adoption papers. The look on his face, raw with love and fierce protection, said everything words never could. But beneath the photo lay the letter, written in Travis's handwriting, folded neatly sealed with gold washi tape that Zia had picked out from her art supplies. Lorraine had peeled it open with trembling fingers, eyes darting around the table as she unfolded the cream paper, the same paper we used to print our wedding vows. Her lips moved as she read silently, "Mom, if you're reading this, it means you hurt my daughter again. Not just my daughter by love, but my daughter by law, by promise, by choice. You may never understand what that means, and that's okay. I didn't write this for you to understand. I wrote it so she knows where I stand. I've watched you for years, watched you treat her like an outsider, watched her face fall every time you pretended she wasn't yours to love, watched my wife swallow her pain to keep the peace. I hoped you would open your heart the way I did. I prayed every holiday that you'd see her the way I do. But if she's giving you this box, it means you didn't. It means she saw what I saw. That to you she isn't real. But here's what's real, Mom. Zia is my child. She is your granddaughter. And if you cannot love her equally, then you do not love me. Because the best parts of me are wrapped up in her smile, her stubbornness, her kindness. I will not allow her to grow up thinking she has to earn her place in this family. She already belongs. She always has. If you cannot accept that you will no longer be welcome in our home or in our lives, this is not a punishment. It's a boundary. One I should have set years ago. Love, Travis." Lorraine had dropped the letter onto the table like it burned her fingers. Her face, always so perfectly arranged in polite superiority, crumpled into something ugly and desperate. She screamed then, a guttural broken sound that made Maddie flinch, and Jonah stopped chewing, mid-bite. She screamed because in that moment her power evaporated. Because there's nothing more terrifying to someone who thrives on control than realizing they never really had it in the first place. She stood so abruptly her chair scraped across the floor, the sound slicing through the stunned silence. Her eyes darted around the room searching for someone, anyone, to rescue her from the truth. But no one moved. Even her sister, who always defended her sharp comments, with strained laughs and excuses, sat frozen in her seat, eyes wide with shock. Lorraine pointed a trembling finger at me. "This is her doing," she spat, her voice ragged. "She turned you against me." I stood slowly meeting her gaze, with a calmness I didn't feel my hands trembling at my sides. "No," I said softly. "Zia gave you a gift today. She gave you the chance to see her. You chose not to." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fireplace. Then Travis turned to our daughter, his voice gentle. "Ready to go, sweetheart?" She nodded, slipping her small hand into his. As we left, I glanced back at Lorraine. Her shoulders hunched over the table, her perfectly coiffed curls trembling as she whispered to no one, "I can't believe you'd embarrass me like this." But it wasn't about embarrassment. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about theatrics or drama. It was about a little girl dressed in gold who finally stood up and said, "I see what you're doing, and I will not let you pretend anymore." It was about a father who gave his daughter the power to speak truth into a room built on polite lies. It was about a mother who finally understood that protecting her child sometimes means burning down the bridges you spent years building, because what's the use of a bridge that only leads your child to pain? We walked out into the cold December air, the sky bright with winter sun, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Zia didn't say a word as we buckled her into her seat. She just looked straight ahead, her eyes clear and unblinking. As Travis pulled out of the driveway, she finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "She read it all, didn't she?" Travis glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes filled with pride and grief and fierce love. "Yes, baby," he said. "She read every single word." Zia smiled then. Not a big smile, not a dramatic movie-ending grin. Just a small, quiet smile that told me everything I needed to know. She didn't need Lorraine's love anymore. She had her own. And that would always be enough. We never went back to Lorraine's house after that day. There were no angry follow-up texts, no tearful voicemails asking for forgiveness, no carefully constructed apologies sprinkled with excuses. Just silence. A deep, echoing silence that spread through every corner of our lives where her presence used to loom. At first, I thought Zia might ask about her. I braced myself for questions whispered in the dark as I tucked her in. Does Grandma hate me now? Did I do something wrong? But the questions never came. What I saw instead was relief. She stopped watching the door at family gatherings waiting to be noticed. She stopped glancing sideways to compare her gifts with other kids. She stopped measuring her worth by someone else's approval. Something shifted deep inside her, something so quiet and powerful. I almost didn't recognize it at first. It was freedom. Because when a child stops wondering why they aren't loved and starts understanding it was never about them, something unlocks in their spirit. A light returns, one that no one else can extinguish again. One afternoon, a week after Christmas, a small padded envelope arrived in the mail. It was addressed to Zia, written in loopy purple pen. She tore it open on the kitchen counter, her curls bouncing with each excited movement. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny heart charm. There was a folded note written in careful third-grade handwriting. Dear Zia, I'm sorry Grandma was mean. You're my cousin forever.